Welcome to the first episode of the Editor's Cut, where Xpress editors interview reporters about what did and didn't make the word count. I'm Bailey, the editor-in-chief of Xpress.
And I'm Eddie Monares, the senior editor of Xpress magazine.
Today, we're looking closer at our biggest investigative piece of the semester, An Imperfect System and an Unsolvable Crisis, which you can find in our latest issue at xpressmagazine.org. The story examines the shared governance committees and external consulting groups that assisted in the administrative decision-making to cover the university's multi-million-dollar deficit. But the future still remains unclear. With that, we'll leave it to the experts to tell us more.
Today, we're joined by our senior digital editor, Bianca Sieraski, and staff reporter, Josh Miranda. Welcome, you guys.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, guys.
For those who haven't read the story or don't understand the entirety of SS State's budget crisis, could you dumb it down for us?
Yeah, I can speak on it a bit first. So basically, what really catalyzed this project for us was the fact that President Lynn Mahoney, she announced a financial emergency in December 2024, and this led to a number of things happening. We examined two facets of this budget crisis, more so the reactions of the university towards it, and that took form in external consulting groups and shared governance committees. That's like the jargon that admin has been using. And just to quickly explain what shared governance really means, that is sort of the efforts that include faculty in the decision-making process, so making sure faculty is a part of whatever decisions are made. And for this budget crisis specifically, it took form in the Institutional Review Committee.
So when Lynn Mahoney announced the financial emergency, that basically prompted the Academic Senate, which is made up of faculty. I believe Associated Students is also represented in that Senate. They basically started elections in every department to get 3 representatives into this IRC. They were given a number to hit in saving money, and that was whether they needed to come up with whether it was mergers or anything that could save money for the university. And they met from May?
It was early or late January 2025 to early May 2025. That was the time they were given to make these decisions. And the people on the committee, like Josh said, they were elected from each department, but it was 3 people from each of the 7 colleges at the school. So it was 2 faculty members and then a 3rd staff member from each of those, and then the president of Associated Students and the deans of undergraduate and graduate studies. So they all met, I believe it was once a week. The policy specifically is called the Program Sustainability Continuance and Discontinuance, and this is basically about how to react to, they use the term fiscal exigency, and when the president declares a financial emergency, this prompts the formation of the IRC through the Academic Senate.
You talked to Tsuyoshi, who had a big part in kind of leading this. That might be the wrong word. What was your consensus after talking to her about it?
Well, I think something that really stood out to me in our interview with Amy was that she herself mentioned how she didn't expect the faculty to be able to reach that number in the IRC. It made me think whether or not the IRC was formed to actually solve the crisis, or whether there's done just to what Mark Allen Davis said in his interview. He explained it how he kind of thought it was a front in a sense to offload responsibility from the administration, and then they're able to say, we had shared governance, we had faculty involved. However, they were not really given a realistic opportunity to give alternative decision-making, or alternative plans to what ultimately is, the gutting of university, or in your story, Bailey, the hollowing of humanities, And to inject my opinion, I think, SFSU are doing a lot to include faculty voices, but at the same time, I feel like it's flawed, It's not really a opportunity to create creative solutions, but rather just a way to check off that checklist of shared governance without actually like I said, have that alternative possibility.
Before the financial emergency was officially declared by Mahoney, in summer 2024, the administration had requested outside assistance to the CSU, and this took form in a financial consulting group. And a total of 5 proposals were sent to the CSU, and they chose the Huron Consulting Group. So we're going to reference Huron in this. That's what that means. So they were already working or were planning to work in summer 2024. The financial emergency wasn't declared until December 2024. So they had already made other plans outside of these shared governance committees to do these cost savings. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but there were multiple avenues that the university was taking to make these decisions. And ultimately, they both released reports. And when we were reading these, they're both very vague, which shows on the IRC's part challenges they had that you can read in our story with time, with data. And on the part of Huron Consulting, they had a lot more financial expertise, to put it plainly, to make like actual dollar amounts, assign actual dollar amounts to certain projects, such as discontinuances, mergers, which are a big part of all these talks, and just putting dollar amounts to all these different aspects where cost savings could take place.
Thanks for that timeline, Bianca. Kind of transition to the next question. I remember the day nearly 8 months ago when you and our former managing editor, Olivia Mendez, sent the public records request for the Huron Report. Your reporting has come a long way with the addition of Josh now. Walk us through that timeline, and more so, when and why did your reporting begin?
Yeah, so it was a while ago, but I remember, I believe, Laura Moorhead, who was our faculty advisor on the magazine at the time, she had put something about Huron into our Story Ideas channel on Slack, and in it she said that the report would be a big deal for the university. So both Olivia and I ended up picking up that story, and on September 10th, we sent a public records request, which is basically you can request public documents from public institutions like the university. You have the right to do that. So we exercised that right, and we sent a request specifically for Huron reports and analysis prepared for the university and the CSU, and we also requested correspondences through emails and other things regarding Huron, their agendas, the work they were doing, and also presentations, other, just anything that could give us more of an idea of what Huron was doing here at this school, because this was done before Huron released their quote-unquote institutional resilience report. So when we sent this, we didn't know when that was going to be put out, and we didn't know what was in that report. So we were just trying to figure out like a baseline for what we were looking for. So we received a response from the Public Records and Subpoena Coordinator at SF State on September 22nd, and in that response, they said they'd conducted a reasonable search for records, but they also cited exemptions to that. And this sort of rang a few, for lack of better words, alarm bells in Olivia and I's brains. And these exemptions they hinted that we wouldn't be getting the full story of what was going on. They cited Times Miracle versus the Superior Court. They cited exemptions on what information they'd be sharing in regards to emails because of the decision makers' need to have conversations about decision making candidly and openly without fear of it being exposed or something by people like us. And also they cited concerns with the weight of public interest versus disclosing or not disclosing certain information. And I'm quoting from their response. They said that the public interest served by disclosure is minimal and outweighed by the public interest served against disclosure. So Olivia and I questioned this reasoning because we were wondering, like, whose public interest are they referencing? Is it their own or that of the campus community? Because to me, disclosing this information is pretty pertinent to the future of the university, and people want to know what is happening at our school and who's making those decisions.
What day did that institutional resilience review come out?
Yeah, that was 3 days later. So they sent that response, and we were trying to formulate a response at the time, but then they put out the institutional resilience report by Huron on September 25th, and we're not sure if we played a role in the release of that and if it was planned to be released on that day or later, but just the correlation between what we were doing and the fact that it was released on that day, we have some speculations that maybe we played a role in that being published sooner rather than later. They had told us that the report or records would be made available to us on November 28th. So timeline-wise, it was just interesting to see that happen while we were working on this.
Yeah, and I just want to note, when we did see that presentation was published, we were still skeptical just because it didn't actually name any of the costs or any of the actual departments. It didn't get into the specifics of actually what was being cut, and that's what really we were curious and critical of, and that's kind of why, correct me if I'm wrong, but we kept reporting on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, like I said before, it was very vague in nature, and something that really stood out to all of us was these 8 to 11 departments that could be consolidated, which means discontinued, merged, whatever. But the fact that they had those numbers but couldn't blatantly state like how they got to those decisions or which departments were at risk of consolidation, it hinted to us that there was more information that wasn't in that report, but we still haven't gotten access to anything of that nature, and everyone we've asked has also not had access to that. There isn't a written report per se
that we know of.
Yeah. Of the data that backed up this institutional resilience report.
Yeah. We do know that the administrators were referencing the Huron report, and it had to be more complex than the institutional review committee. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we should also add, so there's also the Huron steering committee, which the admin, unlike the IRC, which you could look up the IRC on online, you could see all the members who were a part of that. But there was also the Huron steering committee, which was built of certain administrators. The list isn't out there. We don't know the full everyone who was involved with the Huron steering committee, but they were involved with consulting with Huron and giving them advice. And we did get to speak to Jeff Wilson and Michael Scott, who did say they were on the committee, and they mentioned how they pretty much advised Huron and like, how would you explain it?
They met with Huron, and Huron would present their findings, and they kind of just worked in tandem on issues they were facing. I'm not sure. We still haven't gotten a lot of clarity on the steering committee, but in our interview with Amy Suyoshi, she had said that at one point she believed that raising class sizes was enough to get us out of this budget crisis, and she relayed that to the Huron steering committee, but they had said, like, no, that's not going to be enough, and they pointed to other avenues for cost savings, and I believe one of the recommendations they made was to look at tenure density and how many tenured faculty are in a department, and this today has led to the voluntary separation incentive program being something that is being offered to a lot of tenured faculty, and now faculty in the faculty early retirement program. Basically, it's a buyout that's maxed at $110,000 depending on contracts and other criteria.
This story took a lot of reporting to try and come to a consensus. Was there a moment throughout your reporting where it all started to click?
You're right. It did take a lot of reporting. Me and Bianca spent a lot of hours, at cafes, trying to figure out how to structure everything, going through our interviews. And there was multiple moments, sometimes we were like worried, like what we were like seeing wasn't actually the right way, I said like, there's a lot of smoke, and Bianca was like, well, when there's smoke, there's fire. So it was just trying to get through that smoke and get to that, that stuff that mattered. And I guess there wasn't a moment where everything clicked, but, a moment that, like, things started to really piece together was really, like, the disconnect between administration and faculty. Because a lot of faculty would be saying stuff like, oh, we didn't have enough time. This was very hard to come up with solutions because they didn't have that much data. It was like a lot of things weren't updated. Mm-hmm. And then when we talked to Amy Suyoshi, she had a quote where she was like, well, they did have a whole semester. And it kind of really showed how they were disjointed. One side is saying they don't have enough time and the other expects them to have done it within that time frame. And it really just showed how, like, what one side is saying is completely different than the other. And if they can't even get into that agreements, like, how could the IRC itself be something that could come up to, like, possible solutions?
Yeah, and something else, I think if we did have to pinpoint it to one moment, it would be our interview with Amy Suyoshi because of what Josh just said, and also because she had been talking about, another quote she had was something along the lines of, I wish we had started addressing this 10 years earlier. So there's the disconnect, and there's also a sort of negligence around the enrollment decline issue and when they really started seriously addressing it. So those two little details were sort of like, oh, this is something that maybe could have been prevented if it had been addressed earlier. And yeah, just that disconnect was really interesting to see because there is this effort of shared governance at school, but it's hard when the people who ultimately make the decisions are in a different place. They're in admin roles. They're not, like, maybe, I believe Amy Suyoshi teaches some classes. I'm not sure if that's current. It is two different worlds at this university. There's the admin that's paid in large amounts of money, and there's the faculty who are on the ground educating students, doing research, doing all these things, and to be also tasked with looking at all the academic programs at the school and finding out where cost savings could possibly take place. Like, that's not realistic. Like, faculty might just know their department. They don't know the intricacies of each and every department.
Recently, the University of Hawaii Manoa Chancellor Search Advisory Committee announced that our own provost, Amy Suyoshi, is the second of 3 finalists for the position of chancellor. And as we speak, she is there until May 1st. This came out after we already published the story. How did you both react to that, the fact that she could be leaving SF State after, implementing these changes?
Yeah, I can go first. I was surprised and also, like, interested. First of all, Amy Suyoshi, she's been at this university for a very long time, since 2002. And so with that, I can see maybe she might want to change to leave. It's interesting to see that she's considering this position while all of this is going on at the school. I feel like it kind of does further exemplify, like, not really the disconnect, but just the fact that while this budget crisis is unfolding, she can make the decision to just leave and take on a different role. And I don't want to paint her in a way where it's like, oh, it's easy to just leave. I'm sure she's mulling this over in her own mind, and I want to be empathetic to that because
Totally.
I'm interested to see if she does take this role and how that will affect the decision making at the university, because then a whole new person is going to come into that role.
I agree with you. I mean, if I had to choose between a promotion and not taking a promotion, I'd probably take the promotion. But I also, to your point, it's almost like a governor or like a mayor, like their city's on fire and then they go, or like they're going through a wildfire and then just go to like a tropical resort somewhere else, It really shows that disconnect. So yeah, and I talked to some faculty and some have kind of like expressed an idea of like these administrators kind of taking these jobs and kind of creating a mess, or not creating a mess, I don't want to say a mess, but, making these hard decisions where, a lot of pain is inflicted on faculty, and then they kind of do it as a way to show off or like exemplify to other universities their ability to, make these hard decisions. And then once they, get these promotions, they don't really have to face the decisions they made. To make a sports metaphor, it's like a coach or an owner kind of trading away all the good players, or like making a lot of cuts and then like taking a different job at a different team,
You like that one, Eddie?
I do.
I know, I felt like Eddie would appreciate
I
that
appreciate
metaphor. But to conclude, though, I also don't want to, paint Amy Suyoshi or Mahoney as evil villains. I think ultimately, they want what's best, but they have
a job.
They have a job. Yeah, they treat it more as like it's like a business where it's like the margins. You got to think about the margins, and the emotional or the human impact is something like collateral damage in a sense.
There's rarely a case where you can pinpoint one cause or effect on a singular person, and I just want to clarify with our audience that wasn't necessarily Tsuyoshi, even though we talk about her a lot. And I just want to ask you guys, who were the other players or contenders in this?
Yeah, I don't think like one person's to blame either. I think it's like, but it's like a machine, when one gear goes loose, it kind of screws over the rest of the machine. So like, they didn't have enough time. There's, not the best communication between faculty and administration. And even within the IRC, the ethnic studies department had some problems with like attendance. Some members weren't able to attend. So like, there's even some tension within the IRC itself. So like, all these parts, weren't working as best. And then Amy Suyoshi, like she said, they wish they could have done it 10 years earlier. So that already kind of puts a thorn in the entire process. It was just kind of a lot of unlucky scenarios kind of stacking up on top of each other.
So just to flip the perspective on this, when you spoke to faculty, how did they feel about shared governance and the way administration has handled all this?
Some have said, like Josh said, that they appreciate that at least the university is making an effort to involve the faculty. But some of our sources, one of our sources said that they're planning a vote of no confidence for Chancellor Mildred Garcia, for Lynn Mahoney, and for Amy Tsuyoshi. And overall...
Could you explain
explain what no
confidence
confidence is.
It's basically just a signifier of how faculty feel about decisions that are taking place. It's not something that necessarily leads to something else, but it's symbolic in itself that they don't have confidence in the leadership that's taking place. And that's basically what this vote is about. As a whole, they are sort of citing an erosion of trust with the administrative leadership, and that the current leadership doesn't have best interest in the campus community and public education as a whole. We'll see how that plays out.
Why should students care about all of this? I think it's a lot of information, and there's a lot of different players in the game. And our audience is primarily students and faculty. Why should they care?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Today there was a student walkout, and I was asking a lot of students that question myself, because I was wanting to understand, like, some students kind of voiced, like, it's a lot going on, and they have classes they need to go to, they have jobs. But some students were also voicing how, like, education not only impacts them and their future, but, their children are also going to be going through education. And, education is, like, very important in creating our future for our society. And right now, as our world is going towards directions that a lot of people don't really, doesn't inspire much hope, I think this is a place where we could actually get our voices heard and start building those building blocks for a better future. And making sure that the people who are at power, the people who are able to dictate certain things like funding or which programs get to stay and which ones don't, I think it's very important for us to make our voices heard and make sure that everything is being done for the interest of students, and not only students, but, education impacts society as a whole. So your parents, shop owners, people who need employees, people who need nurses, this impacts society on a larger scale than just one university, more than just one university system. Higher education is being under attack nationally, and it's just very important for students to, make sure they get their voices heard. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. It's a big question.
Yeah, I think just these cost cuts affect everyone on a campus, faculty and students alike. And when a student can't find a class that they need to take because we've fired all our lecturers and we don't have a tenured faculty professor to that has the expertise in that area, it affects our educational outcomes. And I think it's pretty plain that when students don't have access to the classes they need, it affects their education.
I wish we could just reimagine our university in a way that could keep faculty, solve the funding crisis, and create a better future for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to wrap up too, I think Amy Suyoshi, Michael Scott, Jeff Wilson, all of them taking the time for letting us interview them shows some good faith and wanting to communicate with students. And even with their negotiations too, I mean, that shows that they're willing to at least face students. And while the negotiations didn't pan out to give satisfactory responses for the student union, I think just at least they're trying. Other CSU, like Dominguez Hills faculty, told us how other campuses don't even involve a academic center or an IRC. They just kind of listen to Huron. So SF State has that thing to be proud of. But like I said, there could be a lot of improvements. Definitely a lot of improvements made.
All right, guys. Well, that wraps up our questions. Thank you so much for coming on and kind of breaking down your story and everything that didn't make the word count.
For more on this story and all the other stories of our graduation issue, please read them at xpressmagazine.org, or if you prefer printed media, you could find our graduation issues in the news boxes around campus.